I'm going to talk to you today about Post-Impressionism. This is an ambiguous term. On the face of it, it means what comes after Impressionism. It's used as a kind of blanket label for a group of artists that do share a few things in common. A few things that they took from Impressionism. And one of those is the use of the bright colors that we see in this image on the screen. And the other is the broken brushwork that was characteristic of Impressionism. But in fact, even more than this, the division between Post-Impressionism and Impressionism that came before is somewhat permeable. One of the artists that I'll talk about exhibited in the first Impressionist exhibition. And the artist that we see here, whose name is Georges Seurat, exhibited in the last Impressionist exhibition. So from an institutional point of view, these Post-Impressionists might be included within Impressionism. But as you're going to see, they all do something a little bit different. They go beyond Impressionism. They alter it. They add something to it in various ways. So the first of these artists that we'll talk about is Georges Seurat, whose work we see on the screen here. An artist who lived a short life between 1859 and 1891, just 32 years. He had a classical background, classical training, although that did not last very long. As a student in first the Municipal School of Sculpture, and then in the École des Beaux-Arts, the School of the Fine Arts, the premier government-sponsored art school in Paris. He certainly developed a taste for a classical approach, an ordered approach to the making of the painting. And we can see that in his mature work. So on the screen, we're looking at a work which is not in your textbook. This is called Bathers at Asnières. Now, Asnières was an industrial suburb of Paris, and you notice in the background that there are smokestacks and modern-looking buildings and a train bridge. But what we see in the foreground is a scene of leisure, suburban leisure, people enjoying the outdoors, swimming, boating. So the subject is very much in keeping with one that Monet or Renoir might have painted, those Impressionist painters. And yet, Seurat does something different with it. You'll notice that all the figures, well, I shouldn't say all, but most are seen in profile. They're positioned so that their bodies are turned parallel to the picture plane. The shapes of their bodies are simplified. They're geometricized somewhat. So we've got smooth contours along their backs. Other forms, such as the hat here tipped up on the ground, have a geometric character. Value contrasts are exaggerated. The black and white here of shoes and garment, the black and white here as well. And the colors contain many complementary contrasts, especially the orangish reds against blues and greens. Red and green are complementary contrasts. Orange and blue are opposite colors, complementaries as well. And notice in this figure, for example, how the value contrasts are managed such that the highlight side of the swimmer's body appears against the dark water, and the water is made darker here so as to create that contrast. And as you move over here, where the body is in some shadow, the water is lightened so that we get these very clear definition of forms, one against another. The paint is applied here in relatively uniform dab-like marks. So all in all, Seurat is imposing an order on the scene, imposing a kind of systematic approach to the representation of this subject that seems to contradict the noise, the chaos, the irregular movement that one might expect to find um, at such a location in confronting such a scene. This work was, it's a large work, almost 7 feet by almost 11 feet, 10 feet in size, about 7 by 10. Um, so it's in keeping uh, with the practice of, um, of salon exhibiting artists to create big, imposing multi-figure works that might draw viewers to them and stand out in the among the thousands of works exhibited. Um, this work, however, was exhibited at the first exhibition of the Independents. Now, this was a new group. Seurat was one of the organizers of this effort. Um, the Society of Independent Artists was formed in the very same year that this was exhibited in 1884, with the purpose of organizing an alternative exhibition that would be open to all without jury or reward. No awards were given. Um, the artists found authorization from uh, uh, the National Ministry of the Fine Arts, and a site was provided by the city of Paris. The first exhibition included 5,000 works by 400 artists, a very big deal. So again, we have here an alternative to the salon, which did continue, and this alternative was sponsored even by the government. Almost immediately upon completing this, Seurat began another large work, which we see here, entitled Sunday on the Island of La Grande Jatte, dating from 1884 to 1886. Again, a large work, 6.5 feet by almost 10 feet. Similarly, a portrayal of Parisians, many more of them, enjoying leisure in an outdoor setting along the Seine River. And this work was exhibited in 1886. All right, let's look at the subject again. We see here among these many more people some clear class contrast. So the man here wearing a sleeveless shirt would have been seen as a working class figure. The people behind him as a bourgeois class. Notice the man with the top hat. Some of them were elegantly dressed. Your textbook identifies this little girl in the center as being watched over by a nanny. And we've got here in the foreground, even more elegantly attired, a couple with the woman with a monkey on a leash, and the bustle as a part of her skirt is what one might suspect of being a prostitute. So it's notable that these figures from different social classes are all gathered together, sharing the same space. There's something then sort of idealistic, utopian about such a harmonious gathering of the different classes. They're doing a variety of things, including boating and swimming. Here's a man playing a musical instrument. This woman's holding a fishing pole, sitting, talking. Although you'll notice that there is a stillness about this that seems strange. Again, the figures are geometricized in their shape and in their position, rigidly ordered, so that across the foreground, 1, 2, the pet, the dog, these people, they're all placed parallel to the picture plane, with the woman identified as a nanny and a little girl looking directly frontally at us. There are only a few figures that deviate from this rigid placement, and that would include the little dog down here and also the little girl. These two active figures are moving more obliquely into the space depicted. The trees likewise are simplified, and their conical trunks are emphasized in their geometric character. So here we see evidence of Seurat again imposing an order on the scene, which um, which is of a very different character than one would expect to find in such a place. And we'll notice that other elements of form are systematically employed as well. Uh, the shapes are exaggerated, the contrasts are exaggerated. For example, uh, where divisions between light and shadow occur, we don't have the kind of flickering sense of the ephemeral that one would find in an impressionist painting. Uh, the the colors are handled in a particularly interesting way. And you'll notice in your textbook there is a discussion of theories about color that Seurat was clearly aware of and drew on. Um, Theorists both in England and in France had tried to um, break down color, describe color as consisting of a number of constituent elements: hue, value, light and dark, and intensity, and to define the relationships between hues. Um, and it was noted that certain colors were opposites, they were complementaries, and they behaved in a certain way relative to each other. Other colors were more closely related, and these would be called analogous colors. So drawing on this information, what Seurat has tried to do is to employ colors systematically and to break any particular color down into its constituent hues. I've got a few details here to show us, for example, um, here. Well, let's see if we can go to this one right here. Whoops. Here. We can see that this girl's head against the surrounding sunlit grass, and the hair consists of an array of colors. So there's bits of green, lots of different reds and pinks, and there's blue as well. The ground consists of, I would say, an overall yellow hue, and yet there's a kind of an orangish, darker yellow. There are bits of green. Now, it was Seurat's belief that by employing these varied hues and tints, that he would increase the luminosity of any particular color area. And what happens, of course, is when you see this from a distance, the eye tends to mix the different dots of color together, and one sees then a general color and not this variety. When we come closer, we see it break down into an array of dots. The term pointillism is often used with reference to this technique because of the color being applied in little points or dots. Seurat and his follower Signac would have said that, well, the pointillism isn't the point. It's rather, Seurat used the term divisionism, that he had divided a color into its constituent hues with the intent of, in the end, increasing one's experience of luminosity, to make the colors radiant, to make them really glow. Another detail, and let's take a look at this. Here we can see the size of the painting. It's now in the Art Institute of Chicago. You can see its installation here, and we get some idea from this this image of the painting in place of its size, its impact. We're looking at Impressionist paintings here on the left-hand side. I recognize this one as by Monet. So you can see that in an exhibition setting, Seurat's Sunday at La Grande Jatte would really stand out. And its novelty, the very different way the figures are arranged, the way color is applied, the systematic order applied to the scene would be a provocative experience for viewers to see and to come to terms with. The painting was displayed at the final Impressionist exhibition in 1886, and it really was the sensation of the show. Now, I should say that some of the original Impressionists, Monet, Renoir, they did not even participate. So by this time, with this painting in particular, the character of Impressionism, what was seen at the exhibition, had really shifted quite dramatically. And Seurat was not the only of the so-called Post-Impressionists to exhibit at the last Impressionist exhibition. I want to show you one other work by him, again, something not in your textbook. Here's a landscape by him. And you know that there are no people, so that kind of movement has been eliminated. And a similar kind of order, boats scattered around, sailboats scattered around, the shadows of clouds on the water spaced so that we get a kind of harmonious order and calm in the depiction of the landscape. Here, one other work by him called La Chahut, and this dates from 1889 to 90. A work that is about 3 by 6 feet in size, roughly, was exhibited at the Salon of the Independents in 1890. And you notice that, again, the color is applied in uniform dots. But we see something new here. Seurat had read in a work by Charles Henry, he met Charles Henry as well, about the impact, the psychological impact that certain shapes have on us. And Henry had said that upward reaching shapes that rise from the horizon, these convey feelings of energy, of joy. He labeled them dynamogenous shapes. And conversely, cool colors, but also downward inclined shapes and lines, that those arouse feelings of sadness and gloom and discomfort. He called them inhibitory shapes. So you notice that this scene of dancing, music making, with spectators in the distance and one here in the foreground, throughout this painting, there are upward reaching shapes, and one sees this in the ornaments on the dress here, for example, on the bows on the shoes, certainly the legs that reach up in this dance. Chahut means, refers to a dance like the can-can, but it's done by both men and women. The flowers on the wall have upward reaching shapes, and these are kind of stylized gas lights. And notice that they too are polygonal forms in which the various sides reach upward. So by thinking systematically, almost you might say quasi-scientifically, about color, about line and shape, Seurat has tried to impose the order on the subjects that he portrayed, and to kind of enhance the feelings that those subjects were to convey through his manipulation of visual form in a kind of systematic way. The other painter I'm going to talk to you about today is Cezanne, Paul Cezanne. Cezanne lived from 1839 until 1906. He was from the south of France, the town of Aix, A-I-X. And his father, like many fathers of the time, wanted him to follow a career in law. And he took some courses reluctantly, but also began to study drawing. And it wasn't long before he was committed to a career as an artist. He went to Paris. He met up with many of the Impressionists. His childhood friend Émile Zola, the writer, had already established himself in Paris. And Cezanne exhibited with the Impressionists from the very beginning. And this is a painting that I believe I showed you in an earlier video called The House of the Hanged Man, which was exhibited at the first Impressionist exhibition in 1874. He exhibited again with the group in 1877. But his paintings especially were the subject of ridicule from critics. And so um, he never exhibited with the group again. He, the most part, returned to his hometown of Aix. When his father passed away, he was financially comfortable, and there he developed his own style in a way that deviated markedly from Impressionism. He said that what he wanted to do was to make of Impressionism an art that was solid and enduring, but had a firm structure to it, like the art of the museums. He also said in the same vein that he wanted to do Poussin all over again, but from nature. If you recall, Poussin is the great French Baroque painter of the 17th century. I've got one work by Poussin here to show you, which is called Landscape et Calme. Now, this is a classical landscape, an idealized landscape. It would have been painted in the studio. And you'll note that in keeping with that tradition, trees frame the view into the distance. There are a series of more or less horizontal lines that mark off the painting into units. A foreground focal point of the goat herd and his flock, sheep and the shepherd in the distance. For further away, a village made up of strongly geometric shapes, with one of them rising up into the sky, and that shape is echoed in the mountains in the distance. Now the undulating, the irregular contour of the mountains, I think you could say is seen in the clouds, even in the tree over here and here. So there are formal echoes, formal resonances throughout this painting. They give it a very firm, harmonious structure. And it certainly conveys that idea of a calm and orderly, structured landscape. So what Cezanne wanted to do was to take that sense of structure, but as he said, to do it from nature, to remake it from nature. And so here is the result. This is one of his 50 paintings or so of Mont Saint-Victoire. This is the mountain that's prominent in the vicinity of Aix, located maybe about 10 miles away, 5-10 miles away. It has a really imposing presence as seen from Aix. He was, one might say, obsessed with it, loved its appearance, and painted it again and again and again from different viewpoints. This is one of his later depictions of Mont Saint-Victoire, and this is in your textbook. If I recall, dates from about 1897. There is a sketchy quality to this that might remind you of Impressionism. Cezanne's brushstroke, however, is a little different, and it's been labeled by art historians as a constructive stroke. What's meant by that are the parallel strokes that one sees in many places, with which he builds up a form. We can see it here in the mountain in different places, a series of blue brushstrokes, a series of pinkish brushstrokes, blue again here, green up here in the sky. The most prominent form, of course, is Mont Saint-Victoire, you can see here. But you'll notice that the shape of the mountain, its angled side, is repeated here, at least once here. It's echoed here in the ground. The ground on which it sits upon, kind of a plane, that is echoed in a number of places. And so what Cezanne does is he emphasizes certain things and de-emphasizes other things as he wishes in order to build up the structure, yielding shapes that echo one another throughout the painting, that repeat one another. Notice the line of shadow here. It forms a bit like an orthogonal, tapering as it moves away from us and leading toward the principal motif, Mont Saint-Victoire. You can see here in the sky that there are even straight lines that echo those that appear at slightly varying angles as you move throughout the painting. In the foreground, there are a few houses he's given them he's emphasized their geometric character. They're shed-like buildings, and notice that they're angled roofs. 1, 2, 3, 4, a bunch of lines. Those echo the shape of Mont Saint Victoire. And the colors that one sees in any part of the painting appear in other parts of the painting. That is tying the whole painting together, so that the blues and the purple hues that we see in the sky and the mountain, those are echoed in the ground in a number of places. And even the greens that you see in the foreground, in the middle ground, you see greenish hues in the sky as well. So what he's trying to do then is to create a harmonious image in which all parts of it are linked to other parts. We're aware both of the surface of the painting as being two-dimensional, and yet there are modest hints of depth here as well, perhaps in a building, in the orthogonal lines that lead into distance. We assume the mountain, of course, is far away from us, and yet you'll notice that it's no more, or I should say, no less distinctly drawn than the objects in the foreground that one would expect to see with greater clarity. So the idea of atmospheric perspective is eliminated. I confess this is one of my favorite paintings in the whole history of art. He's painted nature here in a way that has order, certainly not the extreme of order that we saw in the Poussin, but it seems to quiver, to vibrate, and to contain an energy that runs through everything we see, ground and sky. Here another view by Cezanne of Mont Saint Victoire. A little more stable, a little calmer perhaps. And lastly, I'll talk about another subject that was prominent in his art, and that is still life. We're looking here at a fairly small study. This is not in your textbook, but I show you it because it really illustrates a number of Cezanne's picture-making habits. We can see the constructive brushstroke. You notice that across the entire image, there are strokes that run parallel to each other, and almost all of them run from, they run on the tilt, they're slanted on the tilt toward the right-hand side. Notice that the apple here is modeled not in light and dark, but in color. Really, every one of these apples, you can see, contains a number of hues, and the shift from red to orange to yellow, over here from yellow to green, from here from a red to a dark yellow to a light yellow, suggests the turn of the form in space. It gives the apple a sense of roundness that is akin to modeling in light and shadow. Now there is dark here that would normally be used for shadow, but it is used to outline, to surround a lot of the apples, and it tends to flatten them out. So in the end, I think we have an image that has that conveys sensations of three-dimensionality, that modeling with color seen in the apples, but conversely looks flat. The surroundings look flat and seem to affirm the two-dimensional surface of the canvas. Likewise, these black areas look flat as well. So when you have those two sensations happening simultaneously, you get an image that has a kind of inherent tension, but also an aliveness that I think makes it interesting, exciting to see. This is the still life that's in your textbook. And this is a larger, more finished image entitled Basket of Apples, dating from about 1895. It's very difficult to determine the date on Cezanne's works because he exhibited so few of them during his lifetime. He signed almost nothing and did not date his paintings. So virtually all of his paintings are just indicated as having been over a course of years, maybe 5 years or a whole decade, or by an indication like circa 1895. This work is about 2 feet square, 2 feet 2 feet by 3 feet roughly. Um, its subject matter is fairly conventional. We might see something like this in Dutch 17th century still life. Um, the, the advantage of painting still life for Cezanne was that he could arrange these things exactly as he wished them to be. Um, and it would sit there unchanged for a period of time. Um, in fact, he would work on a painting so long that the fruit would begin to rot before he was finished with it. So here we have a lot of apples. It looks like half of them have been tipped out of the basket and been scattered across a napkin or a tablecloth. You've got a wine bottle, and then you've got a stack of biscuits on a plate in the background. Uh, You'll notice some oddities if you look at this carefully. For example, the lines of the table do not connect. They're disjunct. So for example, this line is a little offset from this line and quite definitely uh, higher than this line over here. And yet they're presumably all the back edge of the table. The lines in the front of the table, here is the bottom of the tabletop, here's the edge of the tabletop, here's the edge over here on the right-hand side. They don't align up either. So these lines and shapes are where Cezanne wanted to put them in order to attain the pictorial order that he envisioned. The arrangement is one that directs our attention in many ways toward the center. So the basket is tipped toward the center. The biscuits are tipped or inclined toward the center. Cezanne has emphasized here a diagonal line in the tablecloth that leads us toward the center. You see the same kind of modeling with color in the apples. Notice that they're also surrounded by dark lines that to some extent, in some places, has the effect of flattening them out, making them appear to be two-dimensional shapes. The wine bottle is different on its either side. We've got more of a curve here and more of a straight line. And here a straight line is kind of, indistinct. This is the result, perhaps in this case, of Cezanne looking at the wine bottle from different points of view. This was a technique that he would use quite methodically. One sees in many paintings that, unlike the Renaissance approach, an approach used by artists since the Renaissance of looking at all of their subject matter from the same point of view, so as to attain a kind of naturalistic plausibility, Cezanne would quite intentionally look at things from different points of view and combine what he saw in the same image. So in many ways, this image is not naturalistic. It goes beyond naturalism quite intentionally in order to attain that pictorial order that Cezanne sought and which he found more satisfying than what nature presents in a direct way. I'll follow this up with a lecture on Gauguin and Van Gogh, two artists that are also placed under the Post-Impressionism label. But we're going to find that their art is really quite different and is more about emotion and symbolic content than the imposition of order on a subject that we've seen in Cezanne and Seurat.